Welcome back for the afternoon. It's with great pleasure that I'm going to present Johan, who comes from South Africa. I think it's probably the most pleasant and beautiful factory I've ever seen in my life. He's going to show you it in videos. It's a nice place to work, must say. He read the goal a few years ago, and he's got this disease really badly since if you open his company brochure, it's basically first thing he says is we apply the theory constraints approach to do business, okay? And so he'll show you what that means. And Clocomelo is what he's going to talk to you about, because as Eddie Goldratt said, if you had to summarize the theory constraints in one word, it might be focus. And in the language of the community in which his factory is in, it's Clocomelo, if I say it right. So, Johan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Philip, Odette, and everybody else, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Hopefully I can do the multitasking thing successfully as well. I'm not going to talk too much about me. You can read it. I had the privilege to grow up in South Africa, worked for around 30 years in system engineering, aircraft design, system design, implementation, then later on program management. And in around 2007, I became responsible for this specific company that I will give you the presentation on. So maybe when you think about South Africa, maybe different things come to mind. Maybe some of you have had a holiday there. We have interesting things. Our flag, if you look carefully, represents the TOC colors, by the way. Don't know if you've noticed that. We have interesting people. We have fantastic wildlife. We have poverty. We have a fantastic mountain. And we have rhino poaching. And a lot of other things. But it's still a fantastic country to live in and to do business in. So what do our company do? We employ 660 people. We have roughly 400 people on the shop floor making stuff. Roughly 100 engineers. And we're 100%, or we call it a 99% export company. And a limited supply chain in South Africa. Another characteristic is that we have 300 international suppliers, and we have a fairly high added value in the country. We spent quite a bit of money, the little bit that we have, mostly in this domain, because we see that probably as the vehicle that will secure our future, in fact. So, of course, to play in this world, you need to have all these fancy quality approvals and process approvals and so forth. On the top, you'll see the customers that we have, basically Boeing and Airbus. And we work on A320 specifically through Tier 1s. The saffron that you see there is Saffron Electrical Systems. Electrical power, yes. And Spirit Aerosystems, predominantly the UK branch thereof. Airbus Defence and Space in Germany predominantly, and Airbus in France and in the UK. So that gives you a feel for who we work with. So there's just a picture there of some of the products that we manufacture. So you'll see fairly big variety from simple parts to complex parts that go into complex assemblies. Some of them running at full rate of around 60 for Airbus and 54 or 56, something like that for Boeing, and then some other products running at a rate of 1 a month. So quite a variety and quite a difference in technologies that we do. We have one customer that likes to refer to us as the Swiss Army knife. I'm still trying to figure out if it's a compliment or a problem. But this is typically what we can do in the factory. So maybe then to talk a little bit about TOC. So I think I read the goal probably in 2010. And for 2 years pretty much didn't do anything because I didn't know where to start. I knew that I had to increase throughput, I had to reduce investment, and I have to look at or try and reduce operating expense, but where to start? Then probably around 2012 we started to really make some progress, but in 2014 we really took a very definitive decision to say that we're going to implement TOC as a way of life in all aspects, or at least in all possible aspects that's within our control. So that's where we really started. At that time, we had a fairly mature business and quality systems. We've been running on PLM for 10 years. We had a stable and a proper working ERP with proper correctish data. We had some exposure to lean. We had some exposure to QRQC and similar improvement technologies or concepts. But then we started to have this conversation about how do we link strategy, operations, and the culture thing, the people thing, to try and find that sweet spot. And in that process, we started to work with a TOC consultant, and we realized that we have to embark on a journey. That journey, first of all, had to build a really reliable company, and then, only then, can we start to think about capitalize and sustain. We picked the reliability model, by the way. I'll come back to that a little bit later on as well. And through that process, we eventually, probably only about a year ago, really got to the place where we could answer why are we actually doing all of this. And what we believe the answer is that we are trying, and we're on a journey, to move away from a design and manufacturing of aircraft parts, which is much a transactional business, to providing an integrated solution to our customers. And in the process, hopefully, they can also benefit communities and partnerships through our skills and our innovation. So this is the journey that we are on, and you'll see that on the top of my slides as well. So clearly, we have the full supply chain happening in our business. So we took specific steps and specific interventions. So I'm really going to talk here about what did we do. So, as I said on the previous slide, we needed to find a solution to bring strategy and the culture concept to the discussion. And from day one, we said we have to be able to measure results. We have to be able to see what we're doing, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Through that process, I would say probably a few things happened, but some of the bigger things that happened is with the original consultant, we developed a strategy and tactics tree. I asked the question this morning, sort of facetiously, because the fact is when we had the first strategy and tactics tree done, it was 134 pages. The truth is we probably didn't fully understand it. The sort of language that was used is, don't worry, these are all pregnant words. They have to be pregnant. They have to be very pregnant. Some of them were too pregnant for us to understand. But we continued on the road. We didn't get disheartened or didn't lose energy in that process. But another very important learning for us was through Philip, in fact, we met another interesting gentleman, Bill Detmer, and we went also through the logical thinking process. And maybe in that process for us, we got final clarity on what are we actually trying to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit about that. On the other side, we also realized that we need to deal with the people aspect. Bill Detmer has a whole chapter in his book, chapter 8, where he talks about changing the status quo, but he doesn't tell you how to do it. What we think we found here is a very interesting book, first of all, The Power of Change. It is also a big organization behind that, Grid International. I'm not an expert, but I have a few slides on that. Really worthwhile to read that book and try and understand what it's trying to bring to the total work package, specifically talking about how do you change the status quo, how do you influence people. We also, in this area, developed a full strategy and tactics. We called it Inspiring and Motivating People. So that was a separate S&T that we developed for that. Then, on the other hand, we insisted also to implement throughput accounting. We had various rude ways, crude ways of doing it initially. Later on, we discovered that just down the road from us, there's a guy that is actually publishing a very practical book, very useful book, very easy to implement, and we have since been able to upgrade the crude way of doing it. And then another very interesting one is this methodology, which is behind GRID, allows you to measure team culture. And that, in our in our humble opinion, turned out to be one of the bigger discoveries that we made. So the areas that we touched. Clearly, we looked at the sales and marketing side, following the principle that it's not luck. You have to have a system, you have to have a plan. Then in the operations itself, we clearly looked at things like stock buffers across the board, work in progress management, the 5 focusing steps. I think pretty much everybody in the company can recite them if you ask them, if you catch them in a corridor. We also intervened in the way in which we manage our sub-tier manufacturers. And this word here, Philip also asked me, what is it? It's synergogic. It comes out of that language there. It speaks to the principle of self-convinced learning. Really some powerful stuff there, and I would really encourage you to look into that. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we also made a strong attempt to create an unrefusable offer with the key conflict between reliability and profitability, and use that basically to resolve that conflict. If we look at what do we think we achieved, we certainly managed to create a clear strategy for the company, a growth strategy. We were clear in setting the goal, communicating the goal, and everybody in the company understanding the goal. On this side, we like to believe that we've created a happy and coherent workforce where we have specifically aligned personal goals with company goals. And we talk about practicing the soundest culture. Philip's comment this morning about how you do it, you tell them to do it, it's okay, but there's a name for it in that book. Read it, you'll find a name for it. And sometimes you have to tell people to do things, obviously. Then, in the operations itself, we managed to bring our work in progress and stock on hand down by 30%. We could reduce our manufacturing lead time from 50 days down to 17. We have high reliability in our project completion dates and also our production completion dates. Far less screaming and shouting in the corridors, far less expediting, far less interventions generally. And we managed to improve our on-time delivery from around 92% to around 98%. Also, we also managed to put 20% more work through the factory without any significant capital investment or any significant intervention other than focusing on flow reduction of work in process. What we are doing now is we are in the process of another iteration on the sales and marketing side. We think we can do better. We need to do better because we simply need to sell more, and it means that we need to attack this one again. So we're working on that one at the moment. Then what was interesting as well, maybe not planned like this, but 2 other spin-outs that came out of this learnings here is that we have today an offering of a ERP integrated production manufacturing solution. We're not into the software business, but I'll show you later on, out of necessity, we ended up there. And we believe that this product could be interesting in the future as well, so we'll take that separately. And we have managed to realign also some of our skills and our thinking and our strategy specifically in a company with the name of Aerosud Technology Solutions. You saw in the video a little bit of 3D printing, automation, things like that. We have a passion firstly for it, and we have an ability in that world. So we are pursuing, I would say, an alternative direction, or an additional direction, should I rather say, in that direction as well. So most of this was what we did. I want to also share with you how we did it, to the best of our ability. There's one last thing that I need to say. One of the things that we definitely can recommend as well, and it didn't turn out, sorry, I'm in front of you the whole time. Another critical success factor for us, which is not part of our goal tree, is the fact that we had the privilege to work with really good mentors. We worked with different people. You'll see their companies and their names later on. And that for us was probably also, in our personal opinion, a very good mix of bringing different skills to the same problem, getting different inputs, and then taking the best out of that. So this slide speaks to the process of developing the strategy and the tactics initially. I would say these 2 points here are really the ones that probably was the biggest learning for us at the time. The concept of measuring flow everywhere, always. Starting on the shop floor, but also in the non-production areas. That visible measure and real-time measure of how flow is happening or not happening. And the other concept that we probably didn't understood initially is the principle of creating a protective capacity profile relative to the position of the CCR. And again, we did not understand that for a long time. Once we understood that, life became significantly easier. Then on the right-hand side, this is probably more the textbook stuff, and forgive me, I'm not very good at all these good things. But we had to go through these things. We had to do them as best we could. For a lot of them, we needed help. What we could eventually do is to publish our goal tree. This is our entrance to the company, by the way. So this is our goal tree. It's hanging in the front door for everybody to see. And that helped, again, to reinforce what are we trying to achieve, and everybody in the company understands what that is. And they understand where they, in person or in a department, would fit into this goal tree. And, you know, the classical story, in order to achieve this, you need to have that, and in order to have this, you need to have that. That principle. Really visual, very simple for everybody to associate with. Lots of things were said this morning about CCPM. We were, in fact, introduced through Philip and Jessica, also in the rollout of CCPM. So I want to just share with you how we do it. So I would say the good things that work for us, we have a defined pipeline of projects, and we don't launch a project unless we understand what it will do to the CCR of that pipeline. So we deliberately make decisions around that. It's a formal proposal process and an approval process. We call it a change board. And in that change board, the motivation have to address TIOE quantitatively. Sometimes we accept qualitatively, but we generally insist on quantitatively. Why do you want to do this? Or why is this needed? And quantify it in those terms. We generally have 3 groups: business systems, IT type projects, capital equipment, typically brick and mortar stuff, new autoclaves, things like that, falls in that category. And then new product introduction is essentially new business, part number roles, evolutions, and so forth. So we group them in those 3 areas because the resources and the process tends to be a little bit different. We don't mix them up. On the right-hand side here, you'll see some examples. So this is a group of projects. Here's another group of projects. Just in practical terms, out of this morning's discussion as well, we have a stand-up meeting twice a week where we discuss with all the owners of the red projects and the yellow projects, either together or separately, on what is causing your situation. There's also, of course, green ones. We don't necessarily talk to them. We monitor them, but we don't spend time on it. Practically, we use ProChain the most. We have some experience also with Cyforma. We also do this. It was actually introduced while Jessica was there. Andre went, bought a box full of mascots. And so everybody gets a mascot, whether he's in the office or whether he's in production or in industrialization or planning or tooling. He gets the mascot and it's on his table. And everybody understands that he's part of the critical chain for 1 day or 1 week or 1 month. So that's what we do there. So obviously the visual aspect is fantastic. It helps everybody to see immediately what's going on. What I want to say as well, it's really important that you have projects that go straight up, straight through the roof. We had them. We still have some of them. It's really important, and the advice that I can give you is do the cause analysis. Try and understand what is the root cause. Philip had I think it was with yourselves, he had an example here this morning about what is the contributing factors. And once we started to document them, started to intervene, you find out that people can now all of a sudden plan better. They remember all the tasks, the quality, the inspection. All of a sudden, these things happen very predictably. So that was probably the biggest breakthrough that we made there. Then very recently, we started to introduce, about 6 months ago, I guess, we started to introduce a piece of software. You may know this, Kanbanize. It helps you to visually schedule tasks and to be able to track the tasking just so much easier than another spreadsheet or nothing or a whiteboard or something like that. It seems to be working well, and we will continue to use this. I've probably said everything I could say there. Then moving a little bit into the supply chain and looking at what we did there. So this is bought out materials, parts, aircraft standard parts, AGS, and things like that. So we manage around 3,000 SKUs. 86% of them we manage through Symphony. So we introduced inherent simplicity software on that side. We have some VMI activity, mostly in the consumable domain. And then there's still 2% of product that we have decided to leave on MRP. So I just remind you what my supply chain looked like sitting in South Africa. We spend roughly 30 million US a year. 65% of that comes out of the US, Europe and the UK. There's my 300 suppliers, and I have lead times that range anything from 30 days to 220 days. As I was mentioning to somebody over lunch, then one of my customers, it's Boeing 737 in Renton, they release their purchase orders to me 43 days before they want the part. So the lead time for this, for example, is the raw material that goes onto that product. So you have this very weird situation of 220-day commitments, but Boeing makes a commitment to me 43 days before they want the part. So these are interesting dynamics. On the right-hand side here, for those of you who've seen Symphony, this is typically where we started, as you can see, and this was the introduction of the buffer traces and then the stability that came some time after that. Although these are not readable, what this is, it is a communication tool that we send to our supply chain with this would be for a supplier, let's say it's supplier Cytec, with all the purchase orders open and all the line items open against Cytec, and it would tell them what is the relative priority of each line on each PO. Because when I placed the PO, priority was what it was on that day. But now 200 days later or 100 days later, maybe the priority has changed. And it's amazing to see how well this kind of communication is in fact received by the supplier. It's easier than what you think it is. They do actually respond to that in a positive way, if they understand the logic and they understand why you're doing that. So they can see which are my probable urgent parts, irrespective of what the purchase order date was or the original delivery date. People can be changed. This one here with the black on the top is what we call an expedite list. So here we're looking at what is the current crisis, what is the current priority, and this could then cut across suppliers, across PO lines, etc. And then this is obviously what will stop the factory. This is an integrated view that we have with our logistics supplier. As you can imagine, our logistics is quite complicated. We are able to track a job from the time that it leaves the supplier. Doesn't matter where it is, we can track it from that point onwards until it reaches our deck. And a lot of our stuff is flown, except the heavy raw materials is obviously go by ship. Lighter stuff mostly fly. I wanted to show you this. So this is a snapshot that is real. Every day it updates. It shows us the buffer penetration status of all the incoming supply chain. What I didn't want to put on here in my first draft, I didn't have it on, is the blue, because it's embarrassing. But the fact is, this is the kind of visibility that we have down to SKU level every single day.
Maybe you could explain the colors.
Oh, yes. Okay, so this is late to the plan. So that's 2%, by the way, if you can't read it. A red buffer penetration, in this case 9%, yellow is 22, green is 39, and 28% there. So this one is interesting. It's a lot of SKUs. It's
because
not
blue is early.
It's too much. Too early, too much. So I can obviously, there's a lot of things that you can blame. The one is certainly still the remnants of MRP. I have no doubt about that. It's very difficult if you have EBQs that you have to adhere to of 20 or 30 or 50 and you're using 2 a month. Then obviously you get driven through a local efficiency. You might get yourself stuck in this area as well. Financially we know that it's not that bad, but if you look at it like this, it doesn't look all that great. Then my pet subject about managing people. It's a very busy slide. But what is really interesting here and what is relevant here is that according to this process, and if you follow this process, you can in fact measure a group's culture. There's 7 culture styles that is documented in this process. They have a map, they have colors, they have names, they have characteristics, strong points, weak points. And through using this process, you can establish a group's dynamics, and you can measure it on a given time and day. You can put measures in place to change that behavior, and in 6 months you can measure it again, and you can see whether it has changed. Now, for an engineer, that's fantastic, because I can have a bar graph. So I can have something like this. Blue, by the way, is the most desirable characteristic of a team. In this specific instance, it's the manufacturing engineering team. It's about 40 people, and this is their culture. So each color have a specific connotation, and there's only one way that, or only one culture that is acceptable, and it's that one. It's the blue culture. It's so-called 9-9 behavior, or the soundest culture. Very interesting reading. Please go and research it. I would highly recommend it. Out of this process came things like a couple of coffee corners in our company, where people go there to, you'll see in the back there, there's 3 things there. It says resources, relations, results. There's many other textbooks as well that talk about R2, which is the relational aspect. R1 being the skill that you have, what you bring to the table. You're an engineer, or you're a mechanical draftsman, or whatever, or a tool maker. But the relational aspect is the R2 of how do you actually work in a team? How do you break down the silos? How do you get people to talk? It was mentioned a few times here this morning. So it's really powerful. And of course, in my simple mathematics, I'm saying that the result is not that plus that, it is that times that. So if one of them is low, then it's really a multiplication issue, and it's really worth focusing on that. Again, we introduced a simple measuring system, so we measure every month everybody from the CEO down to the cleaner. We don't have really cleaners anymore in our company. We measure our performance at a level of how did you change your behavior, your cultural working together, that contribution and that R2 aspect. So we talk about developers, which means you're not really doing anything, or you're bronze, or you're silver, or you're gold. Obviously the objective is to push everybody to gold, and the other objective is to forever So slightly increase the bar, because that is what the continuous improvement aspect, of course, is requiring us to do. Philip started off by talking about Clockomella. You can maybe not read it. It's here somewhere. It's there. So we've linked also very clearly the goal with the purpose of the leadership and the purpose of the teams, down to the lowest level of person in the company. So everybody can understand what is my purpose and what is the goal of my department or of the company. Right, then I'm going to go into a bit of what did we do ourselves. So these are the things you saw here, is where we're able to find solutions out there in the market, and we just use them. Where we got a little bit unstuck is managing our internal production, scheduling the work, prioritizing the work, getting to a point where we have a single priority up in the offices as well as down in the workshop, and that it's the same view, that it's not a different email or a different Excel spreadsheet or a different meeting. So in that process, we ended up developing something that is rather spectacular, probably too complicated. We call it SFDC. It has two sides of it. It has a desktop view where you can literally pull every kind of detail from time in cell, time in system, delay, was it in quarantine, was it rejected, was it completed, everything, literally everything. On the other side, we give the same information but in a different format to the guy on the shop floor. So our requirement was to have job travelers that are fully automated, so it's barcoded, thanks. It's barcoded at every step of the router, so you can clearly track the job, you can track all its attributes, who signed it off electronically, etc. That was a requirement, and we basically pasted that onto the ERP solution. And then there's all kinds of drill down capabilities and so forth. The most important thing is for every cell you have this kind of screen that is normally the background to the cell. And that simply tells you what next job to work on. Tells you what is the color of the job, which is a direct link with a buffer penetration. It's either black, red, yellow or green. And you start from the top and you finish. And then you go to the next page and so you go. Some of the other attributes that it has, so we can manage fairly comfortably around 6,800 SKUs. We use a simplified drum buffer rope system. Most of our SKUs are set up for make to availability, and then we make to order. Typically the higher level assemblies we make to order, and some low volume stuff we make to order. These are some of the reports. This one here, for example, shows parts that went into stock, and it shows you what is the color of the SKU at the time that it went into stock. So clearly you don't really want to see blacks going into store, because that probably is a problem. So you want to clearly have more this kind of behavior. This is another interesting way in which we found also some great returns, is where you have multiple layers of assembly, where you have elementary parts, maybe you have sub-assemblies and then final assemblies, that you can visually show people what is the relationship, the cause and effect of a shortage at this level will result in a shortage there or a stoppage, and a shortage there, of course, and so on. So here you can see that is about 500 SKUs there. That one is about 120, I think it is, and this one is about 30. So you can clearly, very easily, visually, instantaneously see what's going on in that value chain or in that assembly line. So that we found is also very, very useful. Then also in our sub-tier manufacturing domain, we have 21 suppliers in that domain. 60 of them, 600 SKUs, excuse me, for machine parts at 12 different suppliers. We have guys doing machining for us, non-destructive testing, press work, electrical wiring, so quite a variety of things that we do. And again, we can show, this is a screen that the subcontractor in another town or in another country see, which is my view. So he can see exactly what my priority is, which is his priority, and he can then adjust accordingly. In our specific instance, we use consignment stock. So we supply the material to the supplier. He just have to trigger the activity. In fact, how we work is we launch the job in our factory. He gets it electronically and he prints it on a piece of paper as a shop traveler, and he continues the job on his side. That's how we practically do it. That's my story. Thank you very much.